Shalom everyone, my name is Michelle Denicio and I welcome you to another study here in the Pilgrim Youth channel. Last week we finished the analysis of the entire 5 books of the Torah. Today we will begin our series in what is known as the Gospels in English and in Hebrew known as the Brit Hadasha, starting with the book of Matthew, or in Hebrew known as Mattityahu, chapters 1 and 2, with the title, Birth of the Redeemer That Prophecy Announced. When the time Messiah came to this world, fulfilling the mission that the Father had promised 4,000 years before, and beginning his ministry of teaching, Yeshua called men who, upon hearing his teaching, left what they were doing and followed him. One of those men who were called was an Israelite man named Levi. He was a tax collector who worked for the Roman Empire. These collectors did very well because in addition to collecting taxes, they took advantage of the opportunity to extort money from the people. They would sit at the table of the tributes and began to collect, and if he wanted to, he would charge double, delivering what corresponded to Rome and keeping the rest. The publicans were viewed as the most despicable, corrupt, and distasteful thing in Judah. Why? Because apart from the fact that these Israelites worked for Rome, their enemy, the Israelites considered them as horrendous traitors, apostates, and thieves. In Mark chapter 2 verse 14 and in Luke chapter 5 verse 27, this tax collector appears as Levi. But in Matthew chapter 9 verse 9, he appears as Matthew. In Mark, it says when Yeshua was passing by, he called Levi and he followed him, leaving his position, not clinging to the material gains or profits that made him rich over the years. Yeshua saw his need and called him. Matthew felt this calling and turned his back to the system completely, leaving absolutely everything and followed Mashiach's path to become another person with a different name, which in Hebrew is Mattityahu, and it translates as gift from the eternal. Mattityahu obtained the immense gift and privilege of being rescued and counted among the 12 disciples of the Master, and it turned through this book, he made the decision to be a servant of Yeshua and became a living testimony of this message. This is the story that will be told regarding the good news, the proclamation of the promises given to the patriarchs that were to be fulfilled in Yeshua the Messiah. There are 4 Gospels, 3 of which are called synoptics because their stories are more or less similar, but all with the same message of the good news. However, the book of John does not fall into that category because John is different. He has a very deep connotation of the Messiah. He manages to perceive the heavenly aspects of Mashiach. From verses 1 through 17, the text begins with the genealogy of the Messiah, an aspect that shows that this message was directed to the Hebrews, who had the habit of citing the family tree from the beginning in Bereshit, when the generations of Adam are named, and we can see this in Genesis chapter 5 verse 1. Therefore, Mattatyahu is a book addressed firsthand to the Hebrews. The genealogy mentioned by Mattatyahu does not coincide with the one mentioned in the book of Luke. Even though they are synoptic gospels, for many these apparent inconsistencies become a challenge, to the point of criticizing the Brit Hadasha and saying that it has no veracity. Many Bible critics say that the Gospels take the writing of the prophets out of the context and attribute them to Yeshua. But even though there are differences in the genealogies, all reaccounts have King David and Abraham, very important keys as ancestors from the spiritual prophetic point of view. In 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 10 to 12 says, "The prophets who spoke about the grace that was to be yours searched for this salvation and investigated carefully. They are trying to find out the time and circumstances the Ruach of Messiah within them was indicating, when predicting the sufferings in store for Messiah and the glories to follow. It was revealed to them that they were providing these messages not to themselves, but to you. These messages have now been announced to you through those who proclaimed the good news to you by the Ruach HaKodesh, sent from heaven. Even angels long to catch a glimpse of these things." These texts have to do with the heavenly realm that involve prophecy, with messages that were hidden and carefully coded so not even Satan would understand. In Psalms 22, King David was speaking in affliction, creating a scene inspired by the sufferings of Mashiach. When the writers of the Good News Gospel quoted him, they did not take David out of context. In this case, Matthew, through the divine plan and revelation, knew exactly what he was talking about. Therefore, each testimony must be understood from that approach. And although they are not inspired books like the Torah or the Psalms, their objective is to help us understand who the Messiah was and that he precisely fulfilled everything that was prophesied about him. That is why Mattatyahu cites the genealogy to show the Israelites that Yeshua also fulfilled the requirement of being a descendant of Abraham and David. It mentions the generations from 14 in 14, and it omits some people. It is believed that it was encoding the name of David, which has the value of 14 in geometry. And this demonstrates that Yeshua was the beloved of the eternal and in turn of the lineage of David. Since this last aspect was a traditional requirement in Judaism to recognize the Messiah. From verses 18 to 19 says, "This is how the birth of Yeshua the Messiah came about. His mother Miriam was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Ruach HaKodesh. Because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law, and yet did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quickly. Verse 18 and 19 begins by saying that Miriam was already married or engaged to Joseph. In biblical times, a marriage was from the moment the couple was engaged. Each person waited, preparing for the union. The baron had to prepare a home by working, making all the preparations to start a family. The maiden waited, sanctifying herself until the day of the union or wedding. This is the nuptials, and the passage says that Miriam and Joseph were only engaged. She was a young Israelite who was observant and was about to marry Joseph, a righteous man, who upon finding out that his future wife was pregnant, did not defame her, nor handed her over to the council to be judged, as was common in the cases of adultery. From verses 20 to 25, Joseph left Miriam in secret, but it was revealed to him in a dream that the baby his fiancée was expecting was not the product of betrayal, but rather engendered by the Ruach HaKodesh, the divine presence that took a human form to enter this dimension, all of which was predetermined beforehand that her son would descend and be born of a woman. From the beginning, when Eve was told in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15 says, I will put animosity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He will crush your head and you will crush his heel. How would the woman have a seed? Because even though a woman does not have the physical seed or offspring, when Eve was told that a person from her seed would come to crush the head of the serpent, the text was referring to how the Mashiach was going to come from a woman. She was going to be the depository of the holy seed so that the Redeemer could be born without sin. If he were born from the seed of a man, he would be born with the stain of sin. The prophecy of the hidden mystery was fulfilled because he would be the savior of his people. This is a very controversial fact for Judaism, since they completely deny it, claiming that Yeshua's birth has a mythological aspect because Yeshua is the son of Elohim, here on this earth incarnated. Many did believe, but most said that Yeshua was a Greek mythological god because Elohim could not have children. But the scriptures is full of miracles. Just to name a few, we have the birth of Yitzhak, whose mother was barren and old, or the birth of Samson and Samuel, both of sterile mothers. But not only this, the Eternal has done unparalleled works. He sent the plagues to Egypt. He opened the sea for his people to pass through. He gave manna from heaven for 40 years. The clothes and the shoes of the Israelites did not wear out in the desert, and many more. demonstrating that he has all the power and authority. There is nothing that is impossible for him. That is why he sent his son, who already had pre-existence since he was emanated by the Eternal, from before the foundation of the world. It was prophesied that Yeshua was going to leave the heavenly hosts. He was going to incarnate, which makes him the first of creation, the head or Bikurim, and through the Father's holy breath, he made him be born of a virgin to bring redemption to humanity. Joseph received Miriam as his wife, and after the birth of the child, they got together and had more children. This aspect debunks the popular belief that Miriam remained a virgin all her life. In her, we see very positive qualities to imitate, such as her obedience, trust in the Eternal, submission, patience, love, consecration, etc. But it should not be taken with an object of worship or prayer, as we see it happening today with the so-called Virgin Mary. She certainly served a purpose within the plan of the Eternal, but the only one who should be served and given all the kavod, meaning honor, is the Eternal, and the Father's chosen where he placed all authority. In his Son, Yeshua, as the only mediator to bring us closer to him. Apart from that, everything else is idolatry. Continuing with chapter 2, with verses 1 through 8, says, after Yeshua was born in Bethlehem, in Judah, during the time of King Herod, Magi, which refers to wise men, from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. In Bethlehem, in Judah, they replied. For this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him. After the birth of Yeshua, some wise men came. They were not magicians who practiced magic as people assume. They were wise men, cultured in science. They had knowledge of astronomy and prophecy. They mentioned a sign, a star in the Middle East in the heavens that was similar to the one which announced the coming of the Mashiach. These men, in the time of the Babylonian deportation, were part of a school of prophecy and deep knowledge of the Torah. They did not teach biblical mystic or a pagan esoteric mystics. When the prophet Daniel was held captive in Babylonia, he left a school of Jews who stayed in the diaspora after they were allowed to go back to Jerusalem and for some reason did not return. But they waited for the prophetic events to be fulfilled. Some interpretations that Daniel left specifically regarding the 490 years revealed the redemption of Israel through the birth of Mashiach. And this event was announced by a sign in the sky and a planetary conjunction. These wise men understood this prophecy and signs very well. They knew what in Hebrew is known as the Masor, which is the interpretation of the signs in the sky, of the astronomical events in order to recognize a prophetic event. For example, the great event that happened with the death of Yeshua hanging on the tree. There was darkness in the hours of daylight. They were signs of events, and there was also a sign in the coming of the King of Israel. There was a planetary conjunction of the stars. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, the Eternal placed these signs to mark the times in Hebrew known as Mohed. That means fixed dates, meeting, or appointments. When the time for Mashiach came, they revealed it. These wise men arrived in Jerusalem and asked King Herod about the King of Israel, who had been born, because they had seen his sign from the east. Although Herod did not know the exact place where the Mashiach would be manifested, but he did have knowledge that the Messiah was going to be born in Bethlehem, as mentioned in the prophecy of Micaiah. When the wise men arrived to Bethlehem, they greatly rejoiced meeting the child. They bowed to him and offered him gifts, which symbolized different aspects of Mashiach. The gold represents the royalty of the Messiah. Incense was the prayers. He would be the intercessor and mediator before the Eternal. And myrrh was the aldut to the grave, the sufferings he would have to suffer to provide coverage for his people and humanity. When these men returned, they took another path because they were warned in a dream, and they should not tell King Herod who or where the child was located. From verses 13 to 23, Joseph was warned in a dream of the king's intention and told to descend to Egypt with his wife and the little boy. Because Herod, upon seeing that the wise men did not return, felt mocked and threatened with losing his kingship, and ordered the execution of all children under 2 years of age. A devastating event that was also prophesied. When Herod dies, the Eternal reveals to Joseph that he could return, and they settled in the region of Galilee, so that the prophecy that Yeshua would be called a Nazarene offspring would be fulfilled. An interesting fact is that Herod's death is recorded in the year before the Messiah. But as this chapter tells us, by that time the Messiah had been born and was more than 2 years old. It shows that there are some inconsistency between 3 to 6 years. Therefore, the year 0 marks the beginning of this Messianic era, since the birth of the Messiah occurred earlier. In conclusion, these chapters teach us the genealogy and everything from the birth to the first years of our Redeemer's earthly life were like. It is notable how the Creator's purpose was carried out despite all the threats they had to go through, and also how each prophecy was carried out. No one in their humanity could have fulfilled all the things that the Messiah fulfilled. There is no doubt that he is the one sent by the Almighty. This concludes our study for today. Thank you all for your attention, and if the Father allows more life, I shall see you in another video. Shalom.